He swore to kill every Apache he saw until one saved his life in the desert. The water was gone, the horse was dead, and Boone Carter was 3 days into what should have been his final hunt. But something was different about this stretch of wasteland. The heat was more brutal than he'd ever experienced. His vision, blurred from dehydration, made everything look distorted. And the woman who found him, she was the last person who should have helped him. She appeared when the buzzards were already circling, moving carefully through the scorching heat. Her hands were steady as shepherd water between his cracked lips. Her voice was soft when she whispered, words in a language that made him tense with recognition. Boone had sworn an oath on his brother's grave. Every Apache he encountered would pay for what they'd taken from him. It was simple. It was clean. It was the only thing keeping him alive. So why was he still breathing? The woman worked through the night, pressing cool cloths to his burning skin, feeding him small sips of precious water. She asked no questions. She demanded no answers. She simply saved him. But when morning came and the fever finally broke, Boone saw something that shattered every rule he thought he knew about survival, about enemies, about the desert itself. The woman was gone, but on the ground beside him, drawn in the sand with careful precision, was a symbol he recognized, a symbol that should have sent him reaching for his gun. Instead, it left him with a question that would haunt him across every mile of scorched earth ahead. What does it mean when the person you've sworn to destroy becomes the only reason you're still alive? But something was different about this stretch of wasteland. The heat was more brutal than he'd ever felt. The landscape looked alien after days without food or water, and the woman who found him. She was the last person who should have helped him. Weeks earlier, Boone had been a different man. He'd owned land, raised cattle, and believed the world made sense. Then the raid came in the dead of night. His younger brother, Marcus, had been visiting, bringing news from town and a bottle of whiskey to celebrate the successful roundup. They never saw the attack coming. When dawn broke, Marcus lay cold in the dirt, his blood soaking into the earth Boone had worked so hard to claim. The raiders had taken his horses, burned his barn, and left him with nothing but grief and rage. Standing over his brother's body, Boone had made a promise that felt like iron in his chest. He would track down every Apache involved in the raid. He would make them pay for what they'd stolen. He would not rest until justice was served. For weeks, he'd followed their trail across the harsh landscape. He'd learned to read signs in the dust, to track movements across rocky ground, to survive on little water and less food. His pursuit had become his entire existence. Now collapsed in the sand with his lips cracked and his vision blurring, Boone realized his hunt mightn't before it truly began. The desert was claiming him, just as it had claimed so many others who dared venture too far from civilization. But then, gentle hands lifted his head, and cool water touched his mouth, and a voice he should have feared whispered words of comfort in the gathering darkness. Consciousness returned slowly, like surfacing from deep water. Boone felt the shade first, then the softness of woven blankets beneath his back. His throat was raw, but not the bone-dry agony he remembered. Someone had been giving him water. His eyes opened to see a makeshift shelter constructed from brush and cloth, blocking the worst of the desert sun. Beside him sat a clay pot filled with cool water and strips of dried meat arranged on a flat stone. The care was methodical, purposeful. Someone wanted him to live. "You're awake." The voice came from outside the shelter, speaking English with an accent he couldn't place. "Don't try to sit up yet. The sun poisoning takes time to leave your body." Boone turned his head carefully. Through the opening, he glimpsed a woman's silhouette against the harsh light. She moved with quiet efficiency, tending a small fire, organizing supplies. Everything about her actions suggested she knew exactly what she was doing. "Who are you?" His voice came out as a croak. "Someone who found you dying." She didn't look toward the shelter. "Someone who decided you deserved to live." The simplicity of her answer unsettled him. In Boone's experience, people always had reasons for their actions. Nobody helped a stranger without expecting something in return. Yet here he was alive because of someone's inexplicable kindness. Throughout the day, she brought him water and small amounts of food. She changed the cloth on his forehead when the fever spiked. She mixed herbs into a bitter tea that seemed to ease the burning in his throat. But she never came close enough for him to see her face clearly. "Why won't you let me see you?" Boone asked during one of her visits. She paused in the act of refilling his water pot. Because you might not like what you see. I don't understand. You will. There was sadness in her voice that he couldn't interpret. When you're stronger, everything will become clear. As the second day passed, Boone's strength began to return. His vision sharpened. His thoughts became clearer, and his memory of the past few weeks came flooding back. The raid, Marcus's death, his sworn oath of vengeance, the burning need to track down those responsible. He tried to sit up, testing his muscles. They were weak but responsive. Soon he would be able to travel again to continue his hunt. The brief delay would cost him valuable time on the trail, but he was alive. That was what mattered. You saved my life, he called out to his mysterious rescuer. I need to thank you properly. I need to see your face. Silence stretched between them. Finally, she spoke from somewhere beyond the shelter. Are you certain you want that, Boone Carter? Are you sure you're ready to know who pulled you back from death's door? His blood went cold. She knew his name. She knew who he was and what he'd been doing in the desert, which meant she probably knew about his brother, about the raid, about the promise he'd made over Marcus's grave. How do you know my name? The question came out harder than he'd intended. The same way I knew you were dying of thirst 50 mi from the nearest water? Her voice moved around the campus. She continued her tasks. The same way I knew you'd been tracking my people across the wasteland for weeks. Her people. The words hit him like a physical blow, and suddenly everything made terrible, impossible sense. Her people. Boone's hand instinctively moved toward his belt, searching for the gun that wasn't there. His weapons were gone along with his horse and supplies. He was defenseless, alone in the desert with one of the very people he'd sworn to kill. Looking for this. The woman stepped into view for the first time, holding his revolver in her hands. She was younger than her voice had suggested, perhaps 25, with long, dark hair braided down her back and skin bronzed by countless hours under the desert sun. Her clothes were a mixture of traditional Apache dress and practical frontier wear. Leather boots, woven skirt, cotton shirt. She was beautiful in a way that made his chest tighten with confusion. You're Apache. The words came out flat, emotionless. My name is Ayanna. She set his gun carefully on a rock beyond his reach. And yes, I am Apache. The same people you've been hunting across the wasteland like Arabid dog. Boone struggled to sit up despite the weakness in his limbs. Then why? The question burned in his throat. Why save me? Ayanna knelt beside the fire, her movements calm and deliberate. Because you were dying. Because leaving someone to die of thirst in the desert, even an enemy, is not our way. Your way, Boone's voice grew harder. Your people killed my brother. They burned my home. They destroyed everything I worked for. Did they? She looked at him directly for the first time, her dark eyes unwavering. Or is that what you want to believe? The question hit him like a slap. I saw the bodies. I saw the blood. I saw what they left behind. You saw the aftermath of violence. Ayanna poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks into the air. But did you see who caused it? Did you witness the actual attack? Or did you simply decide we were responsible because it was easier than looking for the truth? Boone felt his certainty waver for just a moment, then pushed the doubt away. Apache raiders hit my land. They killed Marcus. That's all I need to know, is it? She stood and walked to where his gun lay on the rock. Then take this. Take your weapon and finish what you came to do. I saved your life, but I won't stop you from throwing it away on a lie. She held out their revolver handle first. Boone stared at it, his heart hammering against his ribs. This was what he'd wanted. This was his chance for justice, for revenge, for keeping the promise he'd made over his brother's grave. But his hand wouldn't move. You can't do it. Ayanna's voice was soft, almost sad. You know something is wrong with your story, don't you? Some part of you realizes that good people don't typically save the lives of their enemies. You don't know what you're talking about. But even as he said it, Boone felt the foundation of his rage beginning to crack. Ayanna sat back down, the gun still extended toward him. 3 days ago, you were ready to die rather than abandon your hunt. Now you can't even take a weapon from the hands of someone you claim to hate. What changed, Boone Carter? He couldn't answer because the truth was too terrifying to acknowledge. What had changed was her. Night fell across the desert like a heavy blanket, bringing with it a cold that seemed impossible after the day's brutal heat. Ayanna had built up the fire and shared her blankets without being asked. The gesture of continued kindness toward someone who'd threatened her people made Boone's stomach twist with something he didn't want to name. "Tell me about your brother," she said quietly, settling across the fire from him. "Why would you want to know?" "Because anger like yours doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from love that has nowhere to go." She pulled her blanket tighter around her shoulders. "What was Marcus like?" Despite himself, Boone found the words coming. "He was younger than me by 5 years. Always laughing, always seeing the good in people. He trusted everyone, believed everyone deserved a second chance." His voice caught. "It got him killed. You blame yourself." It wasn't a question, and Boone didn't deny it. "It should have been more careful. Should have posted guards, built better defenses. Marcus came to celebrate our successful cattle drive, and I let him walk into a death trap." Ayanna studied his face in the flickering firelight, described the attack. "Tell me exactly what you found." "Why does it matter?" "Because I need to understand what really happened that night." The memories came flooding back, sharp and painful as broken glass. I woke up to screaming. By the time I got outside, the barn was already burning. Marcus was lying in the dirt near the corral, shot twice in the chest. The horses were gone. The cattle scattered. What else? Tracks leading north. Apache moccasins in the mud near the water trough. War paint on the fence posts. His hands clenched into fists. It was clear who was responsible. Ayanna was quiet for a long moment. "Boone, when did this attack happen?" 6 weeks ago, the night of the new moon." She shook her head slowly. 6 weeks ago, my people were 300 mewar north of your land. We were gathered for the harvest ceremonies preparing for winter. Every member of our band was accounted for." "You're lying." "I'm telling you the truth. You're not ready to hear." She leaned forward. "The tracks you found. The war paint. Someone wanted you to believe we were responsible, but we weren't there." Boone felt the ground shifting beneath him. "Then who? That's what we need to figure out." Ayanna reached into a pouch at her side and pulled out something that made his breath catch. It was Marcus's pocket watch, the one their father had given him before he died. "I found this at a trading post 2 days' ride from here. Theman selling it had pale skin and spoke English without an accent." "How did you know it was Marcus?" "Because carved into the back are the initials MC. And because the man bragging about it said he took it off a dead rancher after raiding his spread, her eyes met his across the fire. He said the job was supposed to look like Indian work, but the pay was too good to pass up." Their revelation hit Boone like a physical blow. Everything he'd believed, everything he'd built his rage upon was crumbling around him. "What man? Who hired him?" "That's what I was trying to find out when I came across your trail." Ayanna tucked the watch back into her pouch. "You weren't the only one seeking justice for that night, Boone Carter. I've been tracking the real killers for weeks." The fire crackled between them as the full weight of her words settled over him. He'd spent 6 weeks hunting innocent people while the actual murderers remained free. His brother's blood was still crying out for justice, but he'd been looking in all the wrong places. "Why didn't you tell me this sooner?" "Because you needed to be ready to hear it." Ayanna stood and moved to the edge of their camp. "And because what comes next is going to require us to work together." Dawn came with a clarity that seemed to strip away more than just the darkness. As Boone sat by the dying embers of their fire, he felt 6 weeks of rage slowly transform into something harder to bear. Shame. Every step he'd taken in pursuit of vengeance had been built on a lie. "You're wondering if you can trust me," Ayanna said, emerging from behind a cluster of rocks where she'd been keeping watch. "Wondering if this is some elaborate trap." He was wondering exactly that. "How do I know you're telling the truth about my brother?" Without a word, she reached into her pack and pulled out more than just the pocket watch. There was Marcus's leather riding gloves, his silver belt buckle, and a torn piece of his blue shirt. Items that Boone recognized with painful certainty. "I bought these from 3 different men at 3 different trading posts," Ayanna said quietly. All of them told the same story. They'd been hired to raid your ranch and make it look like Apache work. The man who hired them paid in gold coin and promised more if they spread word that it was Indian raiders. Boone took the items with shaking hands. They still smelled faintly of Marcus's pipe tobacco. "Who hired them?" "A man named Cornelius Webb owns the largest spread in the territory 3 days' ride north of your ranch." Ayanna began, breaking camp with efficient movements. "He's been buying up land from desperate ranchers, sometimes waiting for tragedy, to make them desperate." The name meant nothing to Boone, but the pattern was becoming clear. He stages attacks, blames the Apache, then offers to buy out terrified ranchers at a fraction of their land's worth. Exactly. And when ranchers refuse to sell, accidents happen. She rolled her blankets tightly. Your brother's death wasn't random violence. It was business. The cold calculation behind Marcus's murder made Boone's stomach turn. His brother haddied, not in some desperate raid for supplies or horses, but as part of Aylin's grab scheme. It was somehow worse than anything he'd imagined. "Why are you helping me?" The question had been burning in him since the previous night. "Your people have no reason to care about justice for a white rancher." Ayanna paused in her packing. "Webb's men didn't just raid your ranch. Boone, they hit an Apache family 2 weeks later. Made it look like retaliation from angry settlers. A grandmother and her grandson were killed. The survivors were my cousins." Now he understood. This wasn't about helping him. It was about stopping a man who was using racial hatred as a weapon against both their peoples. "So what do? We do what you should have done 6 weeks ago. We find the real killers and make them pay." She shouldered her pack, but not with bullets and anger. With evidence and justice. Boone stood slowly, testing his strength. The desert had nearly killed him, but Ayanna's care had brought him back from the brink. He was still weak, but determination was replacing the exhaustion in his limbs. "You could have let me die out there. Would have been easier than this." Easier isn't always right. Ayanna handed him his gun. "Handle first. The question is, can you put aside 6 weeks of hatred long enough to do what actually needs to be done?" Boone took the weapon and holstered it without hesitation. "Lead the way." For the first time since he'd known her, Ayanna smiled. It transformed her entire face, revealing warmth that had been hidden beneath layers of caution and sadness. "Then we go north. Webb's ranch is heavily guarded, but there's a way to get the proof we need." She started walking across the desert, moving with the confident stride of someone who knew exactly where she was going. "I hope you're ready to pretend to be someone you're not." They traveled north for 2 days, following paths that seemed invisible to Boone but were clearly marked in Ayanna's mind. She moved through the landscape with a confidence that spoke of years spent reading signs in the earth, the sky, the behavior of distant birds. On the second evening, as they crested a ridge overlooking the Webb Ranch, Boone finally understood the scope of what they were facing. The spread stretched across a valley that should have belonged to at least 6 different ranchers. Cattle bearing various brands grazed in fenced pastures, clear evidence of recent acquisitions. The main house was a sprawling structure that spoke of wealth built quickly and without restraint. "He's been busy," Boone muttered, studying the operation through Ayanna's field glasses. "Busier than you know." She pointed to a cluster of buildings near the main house. "See those men coming and going from the bunkhouse? Those aren't regular ranch hands. Webb keeps a private army." Boone counted at least 12 men, all armed, all moving, with the purposeful efficiency of hired guns. "So, how do we get evidence against him?" "We don't break in. We get invited." Ayanna lowered herself behind the ridgeline. "Tomorrow is market day in Millfield, the nearest town. Webb always sends a wagon loaded with goods to sell and men to protect it, but he also sends his bookkeeper, the man who keeps records of his land deals and his payments to raiders." She pulled a worn ledger from her pack. "I already have this sample page I lifted from one of his hired guns. It shows payments made to the men who killed your brother, but it's not enough for a court to act on." Boone examined the page. The handwriting was neat, businesslike, recording payments for special services with clinical precision. "How did you get this?" "The man I bought Marcus's watch from was drunk and careless with his belongings." Ayanna's smile was grim. "But this is just one page. We need the complete records to prove the pattern. And you think the bookkeeper will just hand them over?" "Not to me." She studied his face carefully. "But he might hand them over to a fellow businessman looking to buy protection services." Boone understood immediately. "Good. You want me to pose as someone interested in hiring Webb's raiders. It's the only way to get close to the real evidence. The bookkeeper, Thomas Hartwell, drinks at the saloon every market day. He's proud of his work and tends to boast when he's had too much whiskey. The plan was dangerous, requiring Boone to walk into the heart of enemy territory and convince Webb's man that he was a potential client rather than a threat. But it was also their only chance to get the proof they needed. "What about you? Webb's men might recognize you. They've never seen me before. To them, I'm just another Apache who keeps to the shadows." Ayanna began sketching a map in the dirt, but I'll be close enough to help if things go wrong." As she outlined the details of their plan, Boone found himself watching her face in the fading light. 6 weeks ago, he would have seen an enemy. Now he saw someone whose courage and intelligence commanded his respect. Someone who had saved his life and was now risking her own to help him find justice. Ayanna. Her name felt strange on his tongue, but right. "When this is over, when Webb pays for what he did, when this is over, you'll go back to your ranch and rebuild what was taken from you." Her voice was matter-of-fact, but something flickered in her eyes. "And I'll return to my people. Is that what you want?" She didn't answer immediately. Finally, she looked away from the lights of the ranch below. "What I want stopped mattering the day I decided to save aiding man's life in the desert. That saloon in Millfield Ryer of stale beer and broken dreams." Boone adjusted his hat brim lower over his eyes as he scanned the crowded room for Thomas Hartwell. Ayanna had described him perfectly. A thin man with nervous hands and expensive clothes that didn't quite fit his bookkeeper's frame. There he was, sitting alone at a corner table, already 3 drinks into what appeared to be a lengthy session, with a bottle of whiskey. Boone approached slowly, carrying his own drink. "Mind if I sit? Place is packed today." Hartwell looked up with blower eyes. "Free country, I suppose." His words were already slightly slurred. "Thomas Hartwell, isn't it?" Boone settled into the chair opposite him. "I've heard good things about your employer's business ventures." The bookkeeper straightened with obvious pride. "Mr. Webb runs the most successful operation in the territory. Always expanding, always profitable." "That's exactly what I wanted to hear." Boone leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I'm looking to expand my own holdings, but I've been having some Indian problems. Heard Webb has ways of dealing with Sioux issues." Hartwell's eyes sharpened despite the whiskey. "What kind of problems?" "Apache raiders hit my spread last month. Burned me out, killed my partner." Boone let genuine pain color his voice. "I rebuilt, but they'll be back. They need the kind of protection that sends a permanent message. Mr. Webb does provide specialized services for fellow ranchers." Hartwell glanced around the saloon, then leaned forward conspiratorially. "But it ain't cheap and it ain't pretty. I'm not looking for pretty. I'm looking for effective." The bookkeeper pulled Asmal leather journal from his coat pocket, the whiskey making him careless. "See, the beauty of Mr. Webb's system is that nobody ever suspects the truth. Apache attack your ranch. You sell cheap and move on, or you hire protection that actually works." Boone's heart hammered. Ash caught sight of the journal's contents. Page after page of meticulous records, detailing payments for raids, land purchases, and special services. It was exactly what they needed. "That's quite a system," Boone said carefully. "But how do I know it actually works?" "Works?" Hartwell laughed bitterly. "We've acquired 16 spreads in 2 years using this method. Every single rancher was happy to sell after the Apache trouble started." He flipped through several pages. "Here's your proof. Payments to raiders. Purchase agreements, profit margins. Mr. Webb's built an empire on other men's fear." At that moment, Boone saw Ayanna move past the saloon's front window, their agreed signal that trouble was approaching. Through the bat-wing doors, he caught sight of 2 armed men entering, their eyes scanning the crowd with professional intensity. "Hartwell," one of the men called out. "Boss wants to see you now." The bookkeeper's face went pale. "I wasn't supposed to be back until evening." Plans changed. The gunman's gaze fell on Boone. "Who's your friend?" Boone stood slowly, his hand resting casually near his gun. "Just a fellow rancher interested in doing business with Mr. Webb, is that so?" The gunman stepped closer. "Funny thing is, we just got word that someone's been asking questions about Mr. Webb's business practices. Someone matching your description." The saloon grew quiet as other patrons sensed the tension. Hartwell clutched his journal to his chest, suddenly realizing how much he'd revealed. "There's been a misunderstanding," Boone said evenly. "No misunderstanding at all." The second gunman had worked his way behind Boone. "You're coming with us to have a chat with the boss." "Both of you." Through the window, Boone could see Ayanna positioning herself near the horses. Their plan was falling apart, but they still had one advantage. Webb's men didn't know about her. "After you," Boone said, gesturing toward the door. As they moved outside, he caught Ayanna's eye and gave her the slightest nod. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. The journey to Webb's ranch felt like riding toward his own execution. Boone sat his horse with his hands bound, flanked by Webb's gunmen, while Hartwell rode ahead in panicked silence. The bookkeeper still clutched his incriminating journal, unaware that it would soon seal his employer's fate. As they approached the main house, Boone spotted movement in the rocks above the ranch. A flash of movement that could only be Ayanna. She'd followed them just as they'd planned for. Or, if things went wrong, Cornelius Webb stood on his front porch like a king surveying his domain. He was a large man with soft hands and hard eyes. Everything about him, speaking of wealth, built on others' suffering. "So you're the one asking uncomfortable questions about my business." Webb's voice carried the lazy confidence of a man who'd never faced real consequences. "Hartwell here got a little loose with his tongue, didn't he?" "I was just trying to make a sale," Hartwell stammered. Hess said he needed protection services. "Protection services." Webb let out a harsh, mirthless laugh. "That's what we're calling it now?" His boots crunched across the porch as he moved closer to Boone, the sneer never leaving his face. "You want to know what I call it? I call it smart business. Take land no one wants to give up, make it available, buy it for pennies. Simple. Murder," Boone said in a voice so low it was nearly a growl. "You call murder good business?" Webb's lip curled. "Murder is such a foul word. I prefer problem-solving." His arms swept toward the expanse of his ranch, acres upon acres stolen under false pretenses. "Your brother Marcus, for example, he was a problem. Wouldn't sell me his land no matter how high I raised my offer. Obstinate fool. So I solved the problem." The word struck Boone harder than any fist could have. The casual confession of Marcus's death, spoken without hesitation, hollowed his chest with rage. His fists tightened, but before he could strike, the air itself seemed to explode into chaos. From the rocks above, Ayanna's form flickered in the dying light. No, 3 Ayannas. She'd arranged shards of mirror among the boulders so that her movements appeared multiplied. Webb's gunman spun in confusion, shouting, uncertain where to fire. She fired 2 sharp shots into the air, the sound rolling across the canyon. Then her voice rang out in Apache, fierce and commanding, echoing like an approaching war party. "Raid! Apache raid!" One of Webb's men shouted, exactly as she had hoped. Panic swept them. Horses reared. Boots scrambled in every direction. Boone hurled himself from his saddle, rolling across the dirt, and sprang toward the porch. Webb froze for a heartbeat, just enough. Boone's shoulder crashed into him, driving them both through the railing in a storm of wood splinters, fists, and fury. "You killed my brother for land," Boone roared, his knuckles slamming into Webb's soft belly. "You wrecked families and framed innocent men for your crimes." Webb wheezed and clawed for the knife in his boot, but Boone was faster. He wrenched the man's wrist against the earth until bones creaked and the blade clattered free. Webb gasped in pain, pinned beneath the weight of Boone's rage. By the time the echoes died, Ayanna stood with her revolver leveled, Webb's remaining gun hands staring down her aim. Hartwell cowered behind an overturned table, his precious leather-bound journal lying splayed in the dust, pages fluttering in the hot wind. "It's over." "Webb," Boone said, rising to his feet over the fallen rancher. His voice carried the weight of justice. Hartwell's notes tell it all. The bribes to raiders, the staged attacks, the stolen land. Every sin written in his own hand. "You're finished." 3 hours later, the territorial marshal thundered into the yard with a full posse. Faced with the noose or confession, Hartwell cracked fast. He spilled everything, his words painting a picture of fraud, blood, and greed so grotesque, even the hardened lawman flinched. Webb was dragged into a prison wagon, his empire in ruins. Families he had exiled would reclaim their homes. The hired killers who masqueraded as Apache would face the rope. As the dust settled and the law rode away, Boone stood beside Ayanna at the corral where it had all begun. "It's finished," she whispered. "Yes," Boone answered, his eyes resting on her. This woman who had saved his life, his cause, and maybe his soul. "What happens now?" "Now you go back," she said. "Rebuild what was stolen. Live the life Marcus dreamed for you." "And you?" he pressed, her silence stretched, heavy with meaning. At last she said, "I return to my people. I tell them justice has been served, that the true killers have been punished." Boone stepped closer. "That's not what I meant, and you know it." Ayanna's gaze lifted to his, and in her dark eyes he saw his own longing mirrored back. hope tangled with fear, and something deeper neither had dared to name. "I saved the life of a man who once swore to kill every Apache he laid eyes on," she whispered. "What future could we have? The kind where that man learned he was wrong about everything that mattered," Boone said, reaching for her hand. "The kind where two souls who should have been enemies choose to fight for each other instead." Her lips curved into a smile, warmer and truer than the one she'd given him days ago, and it lit her face with possibility. "Your ranch will need rebuilding," she teased gently. "I suppose someone must be there to make sure you don't ruin it twice." Side by side, they rode south toward his land, toward whatever future they might claim together. Boone felt Marcus's words echoing in his heart. Everyone deserves a second chance. Even men blinded by hate. Even those who swore vows they should never have made. Sometimes salvation came from the last place you'd expect. Sometimes the enemy you feared most turned out to be the one who could save your soul.